This is a bit of a tutorial on how to use Excel to make animated graphs numerically. So far, I've just put in text in some cells to give a simple linear model. The linear model is y equals a plus bx plus a random term epsilon. And so we're going to do that model, construct the data, and then make the graph. The first thing that you need to do, though, is to make sure that you have the Developer tab on your Excel, and it doesn't come built in. So I'm going to switch to a browser for a second and hope you can see this. How to show the Developer tab in the ribbon. You need to add the Developer tab to your ribbon. I also did a Google search on Developer tab Excel Mac. I'm not sure which one of these is the easiest one to use, but you definitely need to get the Developer tab to get this working. So I'm going to close my browser and I'll go back to the Excel and assume that you have the Developer tab. Once you're in the Developer tab, what you want to do is go to the Insert menu, and we want this particular tool, which is called the Spin button. So I've selected the Spin button, and I'm going to now set a control for the parameter A. A is the intercept of the line. I'm going to format the control. I'm going to allow the intercepts to be integer value only, so I can format directly in the cell L2. That's where it's going to go. And the bound, I'm going to let the minimum be 50, and you can type this in as well as using these controls. I'm going to let the maximum be 150. So we've got the control for A, and there it is. And you can see now, if I click away from this and now click on it, by clicking the button you adjust the control. That's the whole idea. I'm now going to do the control for B, the slope, and I'm going to get another spin button. In this case, I want the slope to be fractional, and I made that first button perhaps a little bit too big, so let's make this one a little smaller. So what I'm going to do is put the cell value in this cell over here in O, and going to make the range go from 0 to 100. So the spin button only generates, let's make sure it's working, integer value things. And now in this cell, I'm going to use a little formula. I want the slope to go from -2 to +2, so I'm going to let it be -2. If the range goes by 100, I think if I increase by 4 100ths for each step, and now I want to make it times what's in that cell, so that I think that cell is O4, and you see if you reference the right cell, it's indicating that. And now let me just click enter, and now as I raise this F50, it should be 0. Oops, let's get it. Okay, so it'll go all the way up to 2 and all the way down to -2. So I can adjust the slope that way. I'm going to make it positive for a second. There we go. All right. Now, the epsilon variable is the noise term, and it's distributed uniformly on the interval -c to c. So now we're going to let what c is. And again, I'm going to do what I did the last time. One more spin button. So we're going to go to the insert. Here's the spin button. I'm going to put this over here. Let's format the control and make the cell reference over here. And I'm going to make the range 0 to 100. Again, I'm just going to type in 100. And in this cell, first of all, let's make sure it's working. It's working. In this cell, I'm going to let what C is So I'm going to make C 5 times, I think that's 08. And the reason for doing it this way is if you wanted to make it noisier, you could, instead of 5, make it 7 or 8. If you want to make it less noisy, you can change that. So this way you can adjust the noise via the formula that's in 08. Okay, let's hit enter. And I guess what I didn't do, this should be 08, not O*8. So we have a little error. Let's do it that way. And we see that it works there fine. Okay, so we have various values of the parameters, and we have 3 different buttons to control the parameters. Now what I'd like to do next is enter the values for the data. So first I'm going to have the range of x go from 0 to 100, and the way I'm going to do that, I start with 0 in that cell, and in the next cell, which is K12, I'm going to have it equal K11, the one above, plus 1. Then I can do a recursion, copy and paste, and go from 0 to 100. In this cell, I'm going to put in the random number function, that's rand, with the parentheses, and that generates a random number. I'm going to do that one here too. Okay, so I've got 2 random variables right now. Now I want to show you something that's a little scary about rand, which is if I change the A parameter value, you see rand is changing. If I change the B parameter value, rand is changing. If I change the C parameter value, rand is changing. So any push of a button changes rand. So I have another column here which is realization. Eventually, when I generate all the random variables for 0 to 100, I'm going to put the realizations over here, and the realization will stay fixed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy here, and then we're going to start pasting and scrolling down, and we're going to keep doing this. I think I need to go to row 111. Let's see if I go to row 111 how that works. There we go. And let's see how we've done. Do we at the bottom, did we get to 100? There we go. So I can show all of that, and we've got the whole series there. And now we can build the rest of this stuff. But the first thing I'm going to do is now copy this column and go all the way down. Whoops, I went too far. Copy it. And now we'll scroll back up. I'm going to right-click in this cell, click Paste Special, click Values. And now I have a column full of random value realizations. Look at the real column now. I'm going to click the B button. See, the rand changes, but the realizations do not. Okay, we're now going to set the random variable epsilon, the error term, from rand. Rand is distributed uniform between 0 and 1. The realization is in cell 011, so let's type 011 and see that we got that circulated, highlighted. If I subtract a half from that, I now have a uniform random variable distributed between -1/2 and 1/2. I'm going to go to the formula bar here, multiply that by 2, and now I have a uniform random variable distributed between -1 and 1. And finally, I'm going to multiply by the value of C. C is a parameter, so we need an absolute reference for that. The absolute reference is in cell L, not sure what cell it is. Let's see if it's cell L8. That looks right. Okay, and so now we have that multiplied by C, and so that should be our realization of epsilon. Let's see if that works. Okay, and it's negative because this realization is below the 0.5, so in fact epsilon is now negative. If I lower the noise, I make it closer to 0 in absolute value. If I increase the noise, I make it further away from 0 in absolute value. But since the realization is staying fixed, that it's negative is that way. Okay, now we can build the model that we started out with. Let's scroll up here. So we have this model. I want to now say what y is. Y is A, which is in cell L2, I believe. So that's a parameter. We're going to use absolute references for that. L2, we got that, plus B, which is in cell L4. Okay, it's highlighted the right one, times the variable X, which is in cell K11, I believe. Okay, we got that, plus epsilon, which is in cell L11. Okay, so there's our value of y, and because we've now done this correctly, we can construct all the other realizations of epsilon and the realizations of y by copying here and then just pasting down the way. And we're going to keep on doing that till we get all the way till cell 100. So let's see if we can find cell 100. There we go. And we're going to paste. And now we've got our whole series constructed. So that's our realization series. The last thing that I would like to do, and I'm going to scroll a bit to the right here, is to construct the true line. Okay, I'm going to start with the y-intercept, which has an x value of 0 and a y value of a, which we said was in cell L2. Oh, and I have to put an equal sign in front of it, so let's put the equal sign there. Okay, there's the y-intercept. Now I'm going to go out further than my data over here goes. I'm going to go out till 200 over here. And this is now equal to a again, L2, plus the slope, L4, times my x value, which was 200. Okay, so now I have the true line coordinates over here, and I have now generated all my data. I'm now ready to start graphing. All right, let's begin graphing, but what I would like to do first is I'm going to scroll back to the left here. Now, to do the graph, you have to go to the Insert menu. You have to know what type of graph you want. I like to use the scatter, and in this case, because I actually want to plot data, I'm going to use this true scatter. When I do my graph for intermediate micro, I use this one so I can plot curves this way, but I want to do true scatter, so I'm going to do this. Let me undo that. I'm just going to try to move this thing over so that we can see it separate from the data. Now, don't worry about this mess here. We'll clean that up in a second, but we've now inserted the scatter graph tool. So the first thing you want to do is right-click on the graph, choose Select Data, and now we're going to remove every series that's there. Okay, and now we're going to add a series, and I'm going to call this series Scatter. The x values of the series, and I'm going to move this here so I can actually see, are in this column, and we're going to go from 0 to 100. So let's scroll down here and see if we can get it all. All right, we got it from 0 to 100. And I'm going to go back up to the top before I do the y value so I know which column I'm doing. The y values are likewise over here, and we're going to do that for all the y values. And click OK. And click OK here. All right, let's scroll back up and see what we've created. Here's our scatter, and looks pretty reasonable. Now, let me show you what happens when we increase the amount of noise by making this parameter bigger. What's happening, see, this was before -50, now it's -100. I'm going to make it bigger. Both the upper bound and the lower bound are changing. That is, the scale on the y-axis is changing. That means Excel is trying to be smart and fit the data that actually exists, so it's rescaling. But you probably really don't want that to happen. So what I am going to do is I'm going to format this axis so as to fix the range. Though the minimum is going to be 0, which means negative values will not show up. The max I'm going to make 180. So values above 180 also won't show up. Major unit we're going to keep fixed at 50. That seems pretty good. And now when I change the scatter, let's close this now. So I've done this. When I make this noisier, what's happening is I'm just pushing data that still exists, but it's now off the chart. And when I make it narrower, less noisy, more of the data is on the chart. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a, let me see if I can find this. Okay, let's see if I right-click on some of the data points. And if I do that, I get this thing, add trend line. So I'm going to add the trend line. I'm going to make the trend line thicker so it's easier to see. So there's the trend line, which I assume is being done by a linear regression on the data. Okay, let me close that. And now the next thing I would like to do is to actually plot the true line. So I'm going to scroll to the right a little bit here. I'm going to add another series, select data, add, and now the series name, let's go back up, is the actual line. The x values are here, and the y values are here. And note that it rescaled the horizontal axis, which in this case I wanted it to do. So now I have the real line plotted, and let's take a look at that. So I have one point of it. I think the other point may be off the axis. So I'm going to format this data series. I'm going to do the line style. There's no line there at the moment. So now I'm making that line exist. I'm going to make the line color a different color so that we're sure that it is not, this is the true line. And I'm going to make the line style dashed. So let's make it like this so we can distinguish the true line from the trend line. And let's close that. Now, I've rescaled this axis. Now that I've done this, I'm going to change the scale. Let's see if I can get that axis here again. I'm going to right-click, format the axis, and go the minimum is 0. I'm going to make the maximum 150. And let's close it. And so now we got more of the data showing up. Okay, so now we're pretty close to the end. Let's just see what we've done. If we make this thing noisy, not only does the data move off the chart, but the true line and the trend line become more divergent. If we make it less noisy, the true line and the trend line converge. And you can do this, also change the intercept, so I'm going to just move everything up, or I can change the slope, make it steeper. What I'm going to do in conjunction, I'm going to make the intercept pretty big. Let's make it 110, and then I'm going to make the slope negative, because we haven't looked at a downward sloping one. So you can do all sorts of things of that sort. Finally, what you might want to do is to go to the chart tools and choose the layout menu. So you might want to have a chart title, and I'm going to have this centered, and I'm going to call this simple linear model, and so it does that. And when you do this, of course, now you're actually going right over the graph, so you might want this to be shrunk down a little bit so the title isn't overlapping. You might want axes labels, so axis title primary, horizontal axis title below. What are we going to call it? Let's call it X. You might want to have the axis title for the vertical. What are we going to call it? I'm going to make it horizontal here because it's going to be real simple. I'm going to call it Y. Okay, so now this may be a little bit too low, so I want to have the X have a little bit, and this may be a little bit too much this way, so I want to move this way a little bit. And again, you can resize the graph by just dragging at the side so it looks nice. So now you've got your labels, you've got your parameter controls, and everything is done and pretty good.